I think we should be seeing by now that basically a bad piece is a piece with no prospects. Might be passively placed, might not have anything to do. At any rate, as the end game comes closer and there's only a few pieces left on the board, the last thing you want is bad pieces in your camp. Now this is particularly appropriate to major piece endgames where the queen and the rooks are left, because their activity is the absolute key. It's more important to keep your queen and your rook active, maybe even than winning a pawn or two. Consider the fate that Levon Aronian suffered in our next game, which comes from the recently concluded Candidates Tournament in London, where he's playing black against Boris Gelfand. For some reason I've got the position after move 6 on the board, so we're going to go all the way back to the start and follow the moves, which was a standard Queen's Gambit, very popular at the highest level these days. Black is seeking basically to just develop his pieces modestly and to gradually equalise. And now we come to the position where Aronian played knight bd7. That's something of a fashionable move these days. Black is keeping some options open when he plays it. And in particular, he's looking for the best way to configure his queenside pawns. Quite often in this line, you see black playing a6. Black waits for this bishop to come out, then he flicks in d takes c4, and then he goes through with c5. That kind of represents an ideal freeing situation. Black frees up his game by these means. There are other moves, but other ways for black to play on the queen side, and one of these we'll see in this game, but by and large that is the plan. Now hitherto c5 has been most popular in this position. If you play this way with black, you've got to be aware that white can give you an isolated pawn very easily by taking on d5. Of course, as I say, all these positions are a question of taste. Well, black's got an isolated pawn, but in return he's got complete freedom for his pieces. And there might be some positions in the middle game where black can just dissolve this weakness by going d4. So it's not all doom and gloom. I suppose it's just a question of taste. A lot of top players are playing knight bd7 now, so that's what Aronian does. And Gelfand basically says, well, I'm not going to challenge your plan at all. I'm just going to develop with bishop e2, whereupon black makes a fundamental choice by playing c6. I suppose he could have taken on c4 following the main plan of this variation and then gone with a6, something like this. That was another way to go. But Aronian decides to play a sturdy move here, c6. And so what we've got now is basically a Queen's Gambit declined classical variation, where once again black's got to solve the problem of how he gets his queenside out. I think the reason stylistically a lot of players favour white in this type of position is that it's much easier to see development for all the pieces. White castles, the queen can come out, the rooks can come to the middle. Meanwhile, black has to work hard to get those queenside pieces out. Anyway, Aronian doesn't seem concerned about the queenside pieces just yet. He wants to hunt down the bishop. If black wants to take the bishop, then he has to make concessions according to Gelfand. And so this interesting move, bishop e5, tempts black into taking. But you see, the problem with taking is that not only can white consider taking with a knight here, which gains time on the knight on h5, he also can play d takes e5. When this knight on h5 looks pretty bad, and in fact, white's threatening g4 here directly, when the knight has nowhere to go. So Aronian elects to play f6, and he goes into a kind of stone wall formation now with f5, whereupon Gelfand returns to e5. Black brings his knight back from the edge. Note, that knight is bad in this position, so Aronian is very, very quick to get it back into the game. Really strong players understand when a piece is lacking in prospects, so they reintroduce that piece back into the game. I mean, it's a fairly stable pawn position in the centre. White's still got to demonstrate how he's going to get any sort of advantage here, how he's going to lever open the position. So black's got a bit of time to get his knight back into the game. So h3, another quiet move. Black takes off the bishop, white recaptures with the knight, and now black brings his knight back to d7. Whereupon Gelfand tries to set up a superior pawn structure by playing f4. Aronian takes. Well, of course, this makes sense because black has less space, therefore it makes sense to exchange pieces. The idea is, if you've got less space, you don't want all your pieces clogged up in a cramped situation. So we just take the knight off on e5. So f takes e5. A fairly balanced position has arisen. I slightly prefer white, but black certainly has chances, and Aronian gets on the job straight away with an attack against the e3 pawn. Queen to d2 protects, and now black lumbers out with this very bad bishop. That's a bad bishop because it's locked in behind its own pawns. Rook ac1, rook c8, and now another very quiet move here, a3. White's main chances in this position are linked with some sort of advance on the queen side, some sort of pawn avalanche. So a3 gets that idea in motion. King h8. Well, was this the moment now for black to get things moving with d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and now c5? I think it probably was. I'm pretty sure this is the way to handle black's position. I suppose Aronian didn't do that because of d5, but black should be able to defend himself in this situation. So king h8 is an attempt to sidestep that variation, but now Gelfand clamps down on the move c5 by playing the very good b4. Bishop e8, trying to make the bad piece better, and white now plays bishop to d3. Black plays rook c7, and white redirects his knight to a more active square on f4. Bishop comes out. Good way to, very instructive way of activating the bad bishop. White doesn't want his knight being exchanged for that bishop, so he brings it to f4. Black takes, white recaptures, and black now plays rook d7. He thinks that's going to force some sort of clarification on the queen side, because of course now black's threatening pawn takes pawn, and then rook takes d4. So Gelfand plays queen e3. Takes. Bishop takes. Just when you're expecting rook takes c4 to protect the pawn, Gelfand takes with the bishop. And he allows rook takes d4, because after that he wants to play bishop takes e6, and he's setting up a very good endgame, because he's got a supported passed pawn on e5. Bishop f7. Well, once that pawn on e5 has been created, black's position starts to become pretty unpleasant, because what he lacks is counterplay. Black would like to find some targets in white's camp that he can attack, but they're not very much in evidence. For instance, if he tries rook d3, I don't see any reason why white can't take on a7. He can try and preface that move with a6. That threatens rook d3, but white can stop it with rook c3. Black can put his rook on e4, but then white can sort of infiltrate here, and after queen d4, just rook f2. Everything's protected. White is quite happy to offer exchanges here, because he knows that in the endgame that pawn on e5 is very, very strong. But bishop f7, going back to the game, well, that allows bishop takes f5. And if bishop c4, I think Aronian missed Gelfand's next excellent move, the tactically motivated e6. A very good move indeed, with e7 imminent. So what this means, the threat of e7, is that black can't really take either of white's pieces. If he takes on f1, it's very simple, white plays e7 with a winning fork. If he takes on f5, again white plays e7, overloading the black queen. The queen cannot simultaneously protect d4 and guard against the white pawn queening. So Aronian is down to queen d6, and now white gets to put his rook in behind the passed pawn, getting ready for any endgames that might arise. Rooks belong in behind passed pawns. They don't want to be in front of pawns. And the net effect of this is that black is driven passive in the endgame. Black's rook comes to e8 to hold up the pawn, but in every respect now, this piece is bad. And that is actually what costs Aronian the game. So bishop f7, trying to cover the queening square one more time. Up comes Gelfand's rook. Black hits the bishop, mainly to bring his king into the game. Attacking the bishop is just a kind of side bonus, if you like. Bishop comes back, h5, and now another very good move, f5. And the threat of queen h6 check here is very strong indeed. So king g7, stopping that. F takes g6, bishop takes g6, and now Gelfand continues his superbly precise play by taking on h5. Rook d3. Now I don't know whether all this play, this excellent play by White, was costing him time on the clock, but I don't think he finds the optimal way here. He plays queen e5 check, going into a double rook endgame. Probably better was just to play queen g5, putting black in a very unpleasant pin. And if queen d4 check, king h1, queen f6, trying to exchange the queens, well, now we can just go takes, takes, and queen h4. And basically here the threat of rook g5 is terminal. What is noticeable here is that White's playing with 3 active pieces and Black's only got 2 active pieces. The rook on e8 is permanently bad. It's this feature of the position that's costing Gelfand the game. He can't use this rook in any meaningful capacity. So anyway, he played queen e5 check, and now we go into this double rook endgame. Fair enough. I can see why Gelfand went for this, because he feels he's got 2 active pieces against 1, and rook f5 is his idea. Who knows, maybe White is thinking about playing for mate in this position with rook e4 and then rook g4. So Aronian brings his rook back into the centre. Rook comes up. Rook goes back to attack the pawn. White sends the king to the edge of the board, and the king must go to h6. Rook f6 check, king h7, rook f7 check, king h6, and now rook g7. This is the culmination of Gelfand's recent plan. He's defended his pawn, he's maintained his bind on the position as a result. The rook on e8 still horribly passive, and now he's introduced mating threats into the equation, because the last place you want your king in the endgame is stuck on the edge of the board, particularly when there are queens and rooks on the board, in this case rooks. So black really, I think, is lost in this position. He tries to go for counterplay with rook d1 check, and then he plays rook f1, hoping to buy White off. Rook h7 check, king g6, rook g7 check, king h6, rook h7 check, and you might think that's a kind of useless series of moves, but repeating moves in a position in the endgame is often a good psychological trick, because it wears the opponent down. It also gives them hopes of a draw when you have absolutely no intention of taking the draw. And in fact, White wants to continue the game, and he does so by playing rook fg7. So king f6, Black's king is still horribly awkward, and now White plays h4. King e6, at least this way Black got his king out of jail. Rook g4, king f5, obviously we can't take this pawn because of rook e4 check. So king f5 was answered by king g3, and rook e1 by rook f4 check, king e6, and now h5. Turns out that Gelfand has assessed this position very well indeed. He's even allowed Black to take the pawn. So suddenly Black hasn't got his bad piece anymore, but he can't cope with White's pawn on the h file. The problem is that his king's cut off, and so it's easily winning. Black tries to create something on the queen side as a diversion, but White's pawn is simply too quick. King e6, king g6, king e5, rook f5 check were the last moves of the game, and Aronian resigned because, well, this pawn's just going to queen very quickly indeed. So an excellent game there, game of control. Admittedly, there are a few points at which either Black or White could have been more precise, but in general, a very high-quality game. And Gelfand's handling of the endgame was really good. But of course, the main reason Aronian lost that endgame was because of his eternally passive rook on e8. So just to summarise this section of the DVD, I'd like to get you used to the idea of good and bad pieces as the endgame approaches. The whole game is important here. Maybe a piece that becomes bad in the opening can cost you in the end game. You've always just got to keep this in your mind as your games continue. And my simple advice is, if you manage to determine that you've got bad pieces, try to get them back into the game as quickly as possible. Just very simple advice, but I think very useful advice too.